Hello and welcome to another marvelous video. Today we are going to talk about Spawn. That name needs a death metal guitar riff and snarl to go along with it in order to be pronounced correctly. The character is so sharp and edgy that with only the utterance of his name, you could literally slash your own tongue and send it into an eternal flame of torment. Anyway, he is also one of the greatest anti-heroes in comic book history, and we just can't get enough of him. Al Simmons, who would come to be known as Spawn, negotiated for a commanding position as a lieutenant in Hell's army when he agreed to the arrangement offered by the demon Malbolgia. This new soldier would discover that every generation in human history has its own distinctive Hellspawn. Whether they wanted to or not, these resurrected individuals would write their own chapter in human and Hell's history, given identical circumstances and power. It's time to familiarize yourself with Todd McFarlane's comic book creation, as only a small number of the numerous Hellspawn that has existed over the years have been mentioned in the pages of the illustrious Image series. So stick with us to learn about the backstory of every Spawn version available. Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. Spawn. Of course, we couldn't leave out the original Spawn. After all, he should be the one starting off this list. A CIA mercenary named Al Simmons is betrayed by his superiors and transformed into Malbolgia's Hellspawn. It kicks off a classic vengeance story with one of the most unlikely anti-heroes ever. He's undead, disfigured, and depressed after learning that his widowed wife remarried. When he was alive, Spawn was Albert Francis Simmons, the second eldest of the three children born to Bernard Simmons, a traveling salesman, and Esther Simmons, a devil worshipper in Detroit, Michigan. Simmons was a highly intellectual, physically powerful, and distinguished United States Marine Corps officer who rose to the rank of lieutenant colonel while serving with Force Recon. He eventually joined the Secret Service, where he became a senior officer before being recruited by the Central Intelligence Agency. Simmons later joined the U.S. Security Group, an umbrella body that includes the CIA, NSA, and NSC, led by director Jason Wynn. He then develops into a skilled assassin. During a mission in Botswana, director Wynn became frustrated with Simmons' growing sense of morality and covertly paid Simmons' friend and collaborator Bruce Stinson, codenamed Chapel, to murder him. Simmons was burnt alive and sent into hell. Simmons bargained with the demon Malbolgia, agreeing to become a Hellspawn and serve Malbolgia in exchange for one last visit with his wife Wanda. Malbolgia consented and restored Simmons to the living realm, but with most of his memories erased, a horribly burnt body, and the Violator, a demonic bodyguard. Simmons, now known as Spawn, lands on Earth in a stupor, off-balance, and bewildered state after his death and rebirth. With only hazy memories of his past, he only remembers his name and that he died. Spawn has horrible memories from his past and ultimately remembers his agreement with Malbolgia, but not his wife's name. He seeks down his wife using CIA data and discovers she is married to his old best buddy Terry, with whom she has a daughter named Cyan. He then finds it has been 5 years since his death. Spawn soon encountered another Hellspawn who warned him that his abilities were fed by necroplasm and that if they ran out, he would return to Hell. Spawn seeks to find a new purpose in life while utilizing as little power as possible to avoid returning to Hell. Spawn is pushed into multiple anti-hero escapades in New York City, where he battled street gangs and organized crime. Spawn discovers a new purpose in combating evil while fighting against Italian mobsters and finally slaying serial killer and pedophile Billy Kincaid. Apart from superhuman strength, speed, and agility, Spawn is almost immortal. When he uses his powers, they drain, and if it is entirely depleted, that will lead to his second death. He also has accelerated healing, and he is able to teleport and shapeshift. He also possesses many demon powers. Spawn can also control and manipulate energy and matter. He can even freeze time and have a few telepathic abilities as well. Spawn's distinguishing ability is the manipulation of necroplasmic energy. Necroplasm is a mystical power that Al may employ for nearly any purpose. Necroplasm is a powerful resource that Spawn may utilize to transform materials, fire energy blasts, raise the dead, and so much more. In the beginning, Spawn had a certain amount of energy, 9,999 units to be exact. Spawn finally reached that limit, battled through the ensuing chaos, and is now no longer constrained by it. Apart from all this, Al is also an exceptionally talented strategist, martial artist, swordsman, marksman, athlete, and acrobat. Omega Spawn. Given that it was never completed, this Spawn version is not considered canon. However, it's undoubtedly the most dreadful and conceivably the strongest. One of the most senior Hellspawns in the Spawn world, he produced several weaker clones, but was the principal antagonist of the abandoned Image crossover event Image United. Omega was one of the several Hellspawns that emerged following the initial Plague Spawn. He was formerly referred to as Omega the Conqueror. With might almost equivalent to Malbolger's, Omega had fought Hell for decades since its creation. After destroying Hell's army, Omega decided to conquer Earth. Later, Omega chooses to abandon his attempt to capture Earth in favor of becoming a cosmic conqueror. He is successful in building his army and occupying worlds that are more deserving of his attention. Later, after the events of Spawn 301, when Spawn destroyed his symbiote, producing a space-time rip, Omega in the present time was attempting to conquer a new planet when he was swept through the portal, stranding him on Earth once again. Enraged by this, he vowed revenge and intended to conquer Earth again. Omega eventually formed his own cult and had his followers construct him a ship to escape Earth after conquering it so he could finish his mission, and later had Monolith, a new Hellspawn, kidnap Al Simmons. At the same time, he had caught Cogliostro and interrogated Al about his bomb being sent back to Earth. Later, Monolith betrays Omega and frees Al, forcing Omega to appear to murder him. The duo of Al and medieval Spawn, who gained possession of Mark Rosen's body, saved Spawn and held their own against Omega until the Plague Spawn came. Plague Spawn assaulted Omega, injuring his arm and producing an explosion, forcing Omega to flee. However, the arc was never completed and Omega Spawn was cut short and dropped. Talking about his powers, Omega Spawn is a Hellspawn. Hence, he has all the powers of a regular Spawn. He may also lead an army and utilize magical healing to cure his wounds. Angel Spawn. Angel Spawn is essentially the same as Al Simmons. Therefore, he isn't really a separate Spawn. The only difference is the costume. Instead of Spawn's usual heavy metal look, this version had shiny white wings. He was introduced in the Armageddon story arc, which took place in Spawn issues number 150 to number 164. Spawn regains his lost memories and more with the help of the Green World. His outfit changes once more, appearing to merge with his necroplasmic body. Mammon and his demonic henchman kidnap Spawn, who is then severely tortured in order to expose the secrets his body is hiding. A young boy named Chris is created from Spawn's abandoned heart, which was torn from his body during a previous battle with the disciple Heaven's Warrior. Sam, Chris, and Twitch free Spawn from Mammon's control and bring him back to Earth. Spawn discovers that his body is home to thousands of human souls, each of which has the power to manifest as a Hellspawn. As the globe is being torn apart by signals of the end of the world, Spawn must find a way to avoid Armageddon and discover the truth about heaven, hell, and the earth. Spawn finds out that Wanda's freshly born twins are blamed for Armageddon. When Spawn arrives to intervene, the twins, exhibiting destructive and sadistic tendencies for months, attempt to murder their whole family. Spawn cannot eliminate the twins, and Zira, the Queen of Seraphim, unexpectedly shows up to tell the horrible truth. Jake Fitzgerald is God, and Katie Fitzgerald is Satan. It is revealed that the all-powerful deity known as Mother took God and Satan out of their own domains and regenerated them as human offspring, and they are two of Mother's numerous offspring. Mother created the cosmos and all of its planets. She sees them as failures who are driven by vicious animosity against one another. Mother, who has previously helped Spawn as Kali, the keeper of the green world, and the man of miracles, cautions Spawn that only he has the capacity to transcend God and Satan and protect the human race. She also cautions that Armageddon is inevitable and cannot be averted. To determine if Spawn is qualified to protect the human race, he must pass one last rigorous test, which is to face the disciple. The mother advised Spawn to put his confidence in Cyan before his last test, since she is smart beyond her years. The disciple is actually the gatekeeper to the Garden of Eden, where Spawn must consume the forbidden fruit in order to redeem humanity. She further explains, there are 11 more disciples who are modeled after the 12 apostles. It is discovered when Spawn kills the disciple by blasting him into Eden. Additionally, Spawn's life will deteriorate the longer he remains in the garden because Hellspawns are not supposed to enter the Garden of Eden. However, as the clock approaches zero, Spawn engages in combat with each of the disciples, eliminating them one by one until only Judas Iscariot remains, whom Spawn is prepared to kill. Spawn decides not to kill Judas because he is reminded of the mother's advice to trust Cyan, but Judas kills Spawn by stabbing him in the heart, nevertheless. After that, Mother arrives and plucks a piece of fruit from the tree of life when Spawn is killed. She converses with Judas, explaining that when she assumed the appearance of Jesus, Judas was his most devoted follower, the only one who dared to betray him. Without his death, Jesus' life would have been meaningless. Mother bestows the forbidden fruit's power on the lifeless Spawn, raising him in a new form. His cloak and shackles have vanished, replaced with gleaming white wings. Mother says that Cyan was correct. Spawn had to die in order to be resurrected and earn the strength to compete with God and Satan. When Spawn returns to Earth, he finds New York entirely ravaged by the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. The Earth's slaughtered population has been possessed by angels and devils preparing for the last battle. As Spawn runs to the site of Armageddon, he encounters Zera, the queen of the Seraphim. Spawn overcomes Zera and takes her head as a prize in the war between heaven and hell. As the last of heaven's troops are slaughtered, Spawn arrives at the conflict. He thinks he knows one of them. Spawn searches the battlefield and realizes that he recognizes one of the troops as Granny Blake. She acknowledges that her trust in God has deceived and misled her. Spawn battles the Hellspawn of Satan's army, asserting that the Earth realm is his. Hellspawn from all eras swarms on their brother, calling him a traitor for breaching his pledge. Spawn fights the Hellspawn, making a plea with the ground to swallow them up and return them to hell. Satan sends all his surviving troops after Spawn when he learns about this. God does the same, fearful that Spawn may upset the balance of Armageddon. As heaven and hell strike Spawn with full force, nearly destroying the entire world, he summons all the power granted to him by the Mother and kills heaven and hell's armies and the rest of humanity in a single display of strength. Spawn's power increased exponentially once Mother gifted him hers. He could do anything, such as wish his opponents away, murder them with his thoughts, and even remove gravitational force from his enemies. Medieval Spawn. This Spawn version first showed up in Spawn issue number 9. Medieval Spawn is an oddity similar to Gunslinger Spawn, in that he too was a victim of society's stringent norms and punishments. When he was a human knight in 16th century England, Sir John of York was his true name. John of York was killed by his own lord after misunderstanding the king's outbursts for a command to murder someone and actually carrying it out. John was banished to hell for his previous actions of murdering and enjoying it, where he, like the others, made a pact with Malbolgia. He was brought to Earth some years later, dressed in medieval-style symbiotic armor. After learning what had happened, aided by his discovery of his own grave, John journeyed around England doing good actions in the hope of being redeemed. His weapon of choice was a massive combat axe, occasionally accompanied by an enormous cleaver and a shield. He still wore the blood-red torn tunic or mantle and the white and black armor. Angela, a heavenly agent and an Asgardian, tracked medieval Spawn while he was still a rookie Hellspawn. He was lured into a remote cave and killed by the experienced Hellspawn Slayer's dimensional lance. Medieval Spawn was reborn in contemporary times because of Al's nuke. The Norse Hellspawn. The Norse Hellspawn, created by Bo Smith and Brad Gorby, originally appeared in Spawn Fan Edition number 1 as Nordic, a ferocious Viking raider. Nordic's notorious crusade ended when he battled and was murdered by the people's champion, Macfarlane, the Dragon Master. The latter was content with raping, slaughtering, and robbing any settlements that crossed his way. Malbolgia, seeing Nordic's immediate promise, offered him the chance to become a Hellspawn, which Nordic accepted without hesitation. The Norse Spawn continued his journey across the earth on his horse Ghoul, accompanied by his 2 black wolves, Demas and Darkos, until his hell on earth reached Macfarlane's town 5 years later. Nordic exacted his vengeance by murdering everyone and torching the hamlet, but he could not murder the crucified Macfarlane owing to Mercy, a hunter from heaven, intervening. Macfarlane was able to free himself during the diversion and attacked Nordic from behind. When the odds were stacked against him, Malbolgia drew him from fighting to save his life, knowing that he would be the gold standard for the demon's expectations of all Hellspawn. Like Spawn, Nordic had superhuman strength, speed, durability, and necroplasm magic powers. Samurai Spawn. The Samurai Spawn, created by Brian Holguin and Angel Medina, first appeared in Spawn number 114 in a tale that the demon Mammon told about Lord Izanagi Nakadai, who lived in medieval Japan. Lord Nakadai, feared and revered on the battlefield, would learn upon his return home that his wife and son had died of fever while he was abroad. Later, an elderly man who foretold a future conflict with a dragon encouraged the bereaved and solitary lordship to face his worries. The man also advised him on how to face the dragon once he faces it. Afterwards, this Hellspawn warrior roamed the land, ridding it of bandits for many days, until one day he came upon a youngster standing on a bridge. The youngster vanished as he neared. He followed the voice into the woods till he came to his dragon. After beating it in combat, he realized he had failed his goal by failing to look it in the eyes. When he went home, he saw his land in ruins. On his throne stood a lone man. This fighter would return when a condition in modern-day Japan permitted souls to return to the living world, including a bridge where Lord Nakadai fought the present Spawn. Despite Nakadai's valiant efforts, Spawn defeated him, with the dead warrior remembering to look the dragon in the eye before departing quietly. Dark Ages Spawn. Long before medieval Spawn terrorized the feudal wastelands of medieval England, a more metal Hellspawn existed. Set during the Crusades, the 28-issue Image comic series Spawn the Dark Ages follows the rebirth of a slain knight as a Hellspawn and his adventures. The Dark Ages were appropriately named following the demise of the Roman Empire. Such a disaster essentially created a power vacuum for competing barbarian warlords to occupy. Dark Ages Spawn was once known as Black Knight or Lord Covenant before becoming a Hellspawn. While his moniker seems ominous and evil, he is a defender of the people who frequently comes to the assistance of peasants. As a result, when he became a Hellspawn, his main difficulty was deciding whether to protect innocent peasants from warlords or to become the ultimate warlord of Dark Ages Europe himself. The Dark Ages is a welcome diversion from the standard Spawn plots. The character's inner mind is thoroughly examined, as are moral considerations about violence. Hellspawn. One would believe that Spawn doesn't need a darker version of himself because he's already frightening. However, with Hellspawn, Brian Michael Bendis added a new layer to the Image Comics universe. It's a Spawn spin-off that deals with more adult, brutal, and realistic subjects like suicide or abuse. As if that were necessary, the mainstream Spawn villains, like the child murderer Billy Kincaid, already dominated the gloom department. However, Hellspawn was a success, which increased the appeal of Spawn. The mood was more sinister and nightmare-inducing, and Spawn is much less chatty and more aggressive here. In this spin-off, there is undeniably more wrong with him. Hellspawn's debut issue was released in August of 2000. In total, there were 17 issues created by Brian Michael Bendis, Ashley Woods, and a team of other prolific comic book artists. It served as a companion to the enduring Spawn. This particular series, which focuses on what happens after Spawn number 100, enters another reality where Spawn is ready to lead the legions of Hell against Earth. But it appears he needs some convincing. Spawn is forced to determine whether or not the world is indeed worth rescuing as he makes his way through the ever-changing alleyways of Rat City and gradually realizes that it is a wretched hive of filth and villainy. Although the story hasn't aged well, it's still a fun throwback if you're nostalgic for early millennium goth cliches. You understand what I mean? Fashion style from The Matrix, lesbian demons, satanic bloodshed, and techno sounds. Spawn X. If the DC Extended Universe DCEU taught us anything, it's that somber, serious superhero connotations and themes don't sit well or sell with the general public. Spawn creator Todd McFarlane recognized this, so he allowed a PG comic book version of Spawn. Spawn X from Spawn Adventures, or the most Saturday morning cartoon version of Spawn you'll ever see, was the outcome. The toy line created by McFarlane Toys served as the inspiration for the spin-off that would eventually become The Adventures of Spawn. These replica toys were intended to be from a kid-friendly Spawn show that never materialized. Al Simmons, or Spawn, was transformed into Spawn X, who joined forces with Redeemer and the enormous Omega Spawn. In contrast to the dark, devilish, deal-making nature of the famous depiction of the character, Spawn X obtained his abilities from a mysterious Necro Stone and was blissfully married to Wanda. Also included were Tiffany, Overkill, Mammon, and Cygor from Spawn's horrific cast of villains. The Adventures of Spawn, a web comic created and produced by John Goff and Kari Randolph, featured the backstory of this cleaner version of Spawn's exploits. However, The Adventures of Spawn only made enough content for 2 issues, but I think the timing is suitable for a rebirth or relaunch of the idea. Spawn from movie. Even a year before Blade was adapted into a movie and before Black Panther lifted the standard for black superheroes, there was Spawn. Al Simmons, or Spawn, was portrayed by Michael J. White in the film, which was released in 1997. The fact that White was one of the first black superheroes who wasn't acknowledged, of course, since A. Spawn is a bad movie, and B. Simmons resembles Freddy Krueger. Mark Dupe, who also co-wrote the script, directed the movie, while McFarlane and Alan Blomqvist served as executive producers. The film's idea is identical to the original comic's first narrative. Al Simmons, a military soldier and assassin, has been betrayed by Jason Wynn, a covert government agency director. Wynn directs Priest, his finest assassin, to kill him. Simmons is promptly taken to hell after his death, where Malbolgia, demonic ruler of the many worlds, offers him a Faustian bargain. Simmons will be allowed to return to Earth to visit his loving wife Wanda Blake, provided he becomes his everlasting servant and captain of Hell's army in Armageddon. Simmons accepts the offer and is changed into a Hellspawn, a servant of Malbolgia, in a necroplasm suit that transforms him into a living, breathing creature and serves as his only defense in the world. Despite the critics' negative reviews, since it remained reasonably loyal to the comic books and the impressive special effects courtesy of Industrial Light and Magic, allowed the film to be a modest box office success of that year, grossing $54.97 million domestically and little more than $69 million globally. Also, White wasn't an awful Al Simmons either, at least in terms of physicality. Japanese Spawn. Spawn was a popular enough anti-hero for Japanese entertainment, much like Wolverine was. As a result, they had a manga adaptation of their own version of Spawn legally licensed. The 200-page manga adaptation's writer and illustrator are both Juzo Tokoro, and it is titled Shadows of Spawn. The story goes like this. After their parents passed away, teenage street gangster Ken Kurosawa, a Japanese-American freelance martial artist, hired himself out for money to take care of his ill younger sister, Mariko. Ken was referred to be the elite street mercenary Double K because he had established himself on the streets of Los Angeles as a lone muscle man capable of winning gang wars and street fights for anybody who hired him. After pledging to be with his sister for her birthday, Ken is assassinated by a street gang with whom he had previously made a deal via a vehicle bombing. Ken is brought back as a Hellspawn 7 years after his death in the identical spot where he died, with no recollection of his previous existence. Living in Southern California, the new Spawn seeks safety in an abandoned church. He learns that his sister overcame her sickness and is gradually developing into a promising young Hollywood actress. Even when he dies, his greatest wish will be to keep her safe. Ironically, because of that exact desire, she is now the focus of several otherworldly beings. 3 further active spawns who have been on Earth for some time are also introduced in the manga. The first is a spawn from the McFarlane toy line called Zombie Spawn, who has been alive for around 500 years and is doing his hardest to fight Malebolgia and cause as much trouble for the ruler of the 8th Circle of Hell as he can. In addition, a creature that may or may not be a wolf is introduced and revived before being turned into a female werewolf offspring. Though the female pirate spawn and the werewolf spawn both have marks on their faces that are the same of those on the cowl of the Spawn mask, both spawns do not wear the now iconic armor that is associated with the character. Unlike Kurosawa and Simmons, there is absolutely no armor or markings on the zombie spawn. There are multiple references to the character's Al Simmons incarnation, who is assumed to be active at the same time as Kurosawa. As numerous events in the original comic match events in the sequel, it is strongly hinted that Ken returned to Earth at the same time as Al Simmons. Kurosawa, like Al Simmons, has no memories at first and is met by the Clown very soon after awakening. Clown is momentarily replaced in the manga by a fairy-like entity known as Beelzebub. He reappears as the Violator. One significant difference between the original comic and the manga version of Spawn is that the Hellspawns in the manga are said to be recharged and then sent back to Earth, potentially losing a more significant portion of themselves as each time occurred, supposedly growing ever powerful, but also becoming just plain evil, or else simply losing contact with that which made them. The series only had 3 volumes published. The Japanese version was discontinued on a cliffhanger. Cyber Spawn. The only thing better than a resurrected man with demonic abilities is a resurrected man with demonic powers, whose consciousness has been uploaded into a massive Robocop-style contraption. Unsurprisingly, Cyber Spawn is a cybernetic counterpart of Al Simmons. Though this did not make it into the comic books like some other action figure designs, he did influence following action figures and even an entire McFarlane toy cyber unit subline. Cyber Spawn is available in 2 editions. Cyber Spawn 1 has 3 distinct variants. However, Cyber Spawn 2 has just 1 version to date. Gunslinger Spawn. At least one comic book incarnation of Spawn is well equipped with standard human weapons. It does, however, call his subtlety as a monster of the night into question, which is why Gunslinger Spawn is sleeker and more polished. It's a good rendition of Spawn with firearms, but he's not quite Al Simmons. The tale uncovered in the journal is told in Spawn number 174 and 175. Al Simmons' great-grandfather, Francis Parker, after known as Henry Simmons, was a deserter who was to be hung alongside another man, Jeremy Winston, in the town of Bain. Mammon contacted both men, giving them a chance to get revenge on those who had harmed them. Parker declined, but Winston accepted. Winston, a pastor, was framed for the murder of his family and sentenced to death. After silver was discovered in the village of Bain, so-called merchants such as Ed Kemper stepped in and began flexing their muscles. Kemper led a band of robbers that used intimidation and murder to acquire the majority of the land in the region. When they murdered Jeremy Winston's family, they made a terrible error. Winston, or Old Job, was not a violent man. Before he met his wife, he was a preacher. But after her death, Old Job was filled with rage and went for Kemper himself. He killed 2 of Kemper's men before being apprehended by the marshal and sent to jail to await trial, where he gets a visit from Mammon. During the execution, Mammon produces a malfunction that eventually saves Parker's life, but Winston loses his life. Winston is revived as the Gunslinger Spawn a little time later, and he proceeds to massacre every inhabitant of Bane, sparing only Francis Parker, whom Mammon commanded to be kept alive. Parker is imprisoned in a pine casket belonging to a now deceased Bane inhabitant, Henry Simmons, and drags the coffin down a river to an awaiting Mammon, who warns Parker that one of his heirs will become the Hellspawn that destroys the world. Curse of Spawn. Curse of Spawn is set in a different future timeline. This Spawn is not Al Simmons, but Daniel Lanso 400 years in the future. He, like Al, is resurrected as a Hellspawn. On the other hand, his look is considerably more skeleton and terrifying. He continues to combat evil in the same way as Al did, while also fighting it within himself. He initially debuted in the same named comic book spin-off in 1996. Daniel Lanso is the center of the first 4 issues of the series. His narrative takes place 400 years later in an apocalyptic world after Armageddon, where the devil Phlegethonier and his minion Abaddon, the angel of the bottomless pit, and their undead army of nightmares govern and pursue all humanity. Daniel's life has been harsh for the young man. He used a laser gun to murder his violent and drunk father in order to protect his mother and sister, Madrid. As a result, he spends most of his adolescence and a portion of his 20s in different prisons on the moons of Mars and Earth. During his incarceration, he falls in love with a female public defender titled Mrs. Noon, with whom he had a deep but brief relationship, as she is supposedly murdered because of him for an unclear reason. Daniel's recollections of his past are filled with anguish and rage, such as being zapped with taser prods in jail or murdering a Crater Gang member by crushing his spacesuit's face mask with a rock. Daniel Lanso escapes from a lunar jail on a stolen freighter at some time. But as the tale goes, the cargo on board was fetid, or more likely booby-trapped. Daniel Lanso perishes when his spaceship burns up in Earth's atmosphere, his spacesuit melting and his body burning. Daniel is lost in a whirl of dangerous memories and whispers to perform evil actions and utilize his energies to terrible ends after dying and being reborn as a Hellspawn. The Hellspawn emerges from the arid soil just in time to save his sister and her kid Matthew from a giant monster. Daniel knows her right away, but not his nephew. As Madrid and Matt flee, she shoots her energy weapon toward the Hellspawn. Spawn is abandoned only to be discovered by Abaddon, who encourages Spawn to slaughter the remaining people on Earth. Spawn concurs. The forces of evil have assembled in Vatican City, commanded by the anti-pope, who calls a demon called Bune to destroy a human stronghold. At the same time, Abaddon encourages Spawn to slay human troops and become Hell's general. Daniel fights at every turn, recalling his vow to his sister the last time he saw her alive: never give up on himself. Abaddon informs Spawn that the anti-pope has already dispatched death to seize Madrid and Matt. In a fit of rage, he is met by his master Phlegethonier, who tells Daniel that his fate was predetermined from the start and that using his new necro abilities drains a portion of his soul. The Hellspawn Daniel races against the clock to save Madrid and her son Matt from a horde of Navkis, undead children led by Bune. Phlegethonier brags to Abaddon that the real game can begin after Spawn eliminates Madrid and Matthew. Curse of the Spawn story arc finishes on a cliffhanger. Daniel saves his sister but learns that Matthew has been kidnapped by Abaddon and is transported to the tower. Spawn fights Bune and eventually kills him with his own scythe. Spawn rushes to the top of the tower, only to see Abaddon there preparing Matthew for a demonic sacrifice. Abaddon offers to Spawn the opportunity to save Matt's soul by murdering him so he may go to paradise, albeit this is most likely a lie. Instead, Spawn talks to Matt and instructs him to imagine the place he most wants to go before teleporting Mac back to his mother, who flees as Spawn confronts Abaddon. They had a massive fight, and Spawn looked to prevail by destroying the tower and Abaddon in one enormous blast with his Darklight energy. Daniel, Madrid, Matthew, and a few other minor characters survived the story's conclusion. The plot is wrapped up in its mini-series Spawn, Blood and Salvation. Raven Spawn. Raven Spawn first appeared as an adversary to Al Simmons in the Hellspawn mini-series. There's little distinction between them and the rest of his antagonists, as they're all demons after all. Raven Spawn, on the other hand, stands out from the crowd. Raven Spawn basically operates as an enormously strong and terrifying Lord of the Rings ringwraith, being one of Malbolgia's Death Knights who came to Earth to punish Al Simmons for no reason. He also appeared in the toy line in 2002's alternate reality series. In the Adventures of Spawn universe, the Raven Spawn also makes an appearance as the demonic king Cray von Gore, who developed the K7 Letha or the Hellspawn suit and utilized it to fight the forces of the cosmos. Once victorious, the suit was trapped inside the Necro Stone and became one of the relics of ruin. The ancient stone would grant its power to whoever discovered it, and they would take on the mantle of Spawn. Al Simmons has since found the Necro Stone, which he used to change into Spawn X. Raven Spawn is capable of extraordinary strength, speed, stamina, and durability as a Hellspawn. In addition, he is a proficient weapon master and warrior, has the ability to heal, and can change into many shapes like ravens. He has the ability to enter the thoughts of his targets and use his ravens to attack them as well. Spawnmower. A character named Spawnmower appears in the Archie Comics published Sonic the Hedgehog comic book series and its offshoots. He was a superpowered bot that Dr. Robotnik made to defeat Sonic. Obviously, this character is based on Spawn. Spawnmower, possibly the most powerful robot dispatched to face Sonic after the first two attempts failed, was chosen as the third opponent. Spawnmower was one of the several superpowered bots that Ivo Robotnik had created just to kill Sonic. If he hadn't stopped, he might have destroyed the entire Great Forest, but thankfully, he had the defect of occasionally pausing to strike a pose. As a result, Sonic could disconnect his spark plug wire and drive Spawnmower over to a nearby cliff. Christopher Welland. Christopher made his debut in Spawn number 150. He is one of Spawn's lost souls who later aid him in his fight against the forces of Armageddon. He subsequently kills Billy Kincaid, but is no match for Morana and is ultimately slain by Nyx. She-Spawn. In Todd McFarlane's Spawn universe, several characters have gone by the moniker She-Spawn, with many of them having crazy origin stories. The first She-Spawn was released as part of the McFarlane's Toys Spawn action figure series in Series 4. This mysterious figure has never been featured in any previous comic or other kinds of media. Her short bio on the back of her blister card describes her as a talented tracker and fighter who spends all her time hunting. This iteration received an upgraded figure in the Spawn Reborn series of action figures, but it was never shown in any other Spawn universe media. Nyx appeared in Spawn number 122 and was the first character to adopt the name in comics. Nyx, a Wiccan who frequently assisted Al Simmons with her magic, would eventually steal part of Simmons' energy to save the soul of a friend locked in hell. This bestowed Hellspawn powers on Nyx, making her the first official She-Spawn in the comics. Nyx, however, is not the She-Spawn seen in the current Spawn series. That would be Jessica Priest, who had her own odd beginnings. Originally, Chapel, a member of Rob Liefeld's Team Series Youngblood, was the assassin who assassinated Al Simmons and banished him to hell. When work on the Spawn film adaptation began in 1997, the filmmakers could not gain the rights to Liefeld's character. Instead, they developed Jessica Priest, a deranged assassin played by actress Melinda Clarke, to fill the position. The Priest was later presented in the Spawn comic book and retconned as Simmons' actual killer. Priest vanished from the comics for several decades after receiving her own tale in the spin-off series Curse of the Spawn until her reappearance in 2019. Priest, who had become friends with Nyx over the years, is surprised to see her dead in Spawn number 300. When Priest tries to revive her using Nyx's magic, she ends up with a Spawn outfit and abilities of her own, becoming the newest iteration of She-Spawn. She then collaborates with Al Simmons to figure out who murdered Nyx, with Simmons seemingly putting their turbulent history behind them. This She-Spawn now stars in the Spawn team book The Scorched, where she tracks down numerous time-displaced Hellspawn to combat threats too significant for any of them to handle alone. Commando Spawn. Commando Spawn is just Spawn with more firearms, but he's definitely worse. Commando Spawn is Al Simmons without his cape, but with an assault rifle, sniper rifle, and handgun based on an action figure design from the 1990s that was also resurrected a few times down the road. There are also grenades. There were grenades everywhere. This character version is inspired by Simmons' military background and the dismal and gritty 1990s when everything was bigger than it needed to be. This particular action figure was released in 1997 to celebrate the 25th anniversary of the toy. To commemorate his years of service in the toy aisle, this highly detailed Commando Spawn figure is also painted in a unique bronze color version. Cogliostro. Count Nicholas Cogliostro, created by Neil Gaiman and Todd McFarlane, first debuted in Spawn number 9, when the homeless old-timer demonstrated profound knowledge of Spawn's abilities, secrets, and deep understanding of heaven and hell. Cogliostro, or Cog, as Spawn referred to him, became an advisor and casual companion who not only taught Spawn how to comprehend and use his talents, but also assisted Spawn's comrades in a variety of circumstances. Cog is the one who informs Spawn that his abilities depend on a finite amount of energy and that exhausting it will doom him to perpetual torture in hell. He is the angel on Spawn's right shoulder, opposite the Violator, who encourages Spawn to relish in death and destruction for the sake of death and destruction. Later, it was revealed that Cogliostro was actually Cain, the biblical first murderer. He volunteered to be a Hellspawn but later pulled out to learn how to utilize his abilities for his campaigns. Having no place in heaven or hell, the now residual Cogliostro's strength granted him immortality long enough to await a renegade Hellspawn like himself. When faced with the prospect of death, Cogliostro betrayed Spawn in order to achieve the wicked title of King of Hell. Cogliostro's dominion eventually ended, and he reverted to advising Spawn's replacement Jim Downing. But in the end, Cogliostro is devoted to himself and his interests and hence cannot be trusted. For those unfamiliar with the biblical tale of Adam and Abel, Adam murdered his brother Abel, murdering 1/4 of the world's population at the moment, and he had always desired to control hell rather than serve it. He agreed to become a Hellspawn and serve in Malbolgia's army. He feared returning to hell if he used all of his powers one day and resolved never to utilize his abilities again until he could figure out how to break his curse. Cogliostro is immortal and possesses all the powers that a Hellspawn does, but he cannot use any of them as that will lead to the forfeiture of his life. Marvelous verdict. Anyone can make a deal with the devil, as we saw with Spawn. But it sometimes does matter whom you trade with and for what. Even though each Hellspawn had its own unique characteristics throughout history, they all had this trait. They all responded positively to their demon's question and transformed into something far bigger or worse than they could have ever imagined. Kinda relatable, right? Which is your favorite version of Spawn? Let us know in the comments below. And if you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks everyone.